Hi there. Welcome to another episode of Slowing Down with the Scriptures. I'm Chris Matley. This week I've been contemplating a term that I like and I don't get to use often in regular conversation, but it's a term, an idiom, sea change. You've probably heard that before. It means a complete transformation, a radical change of direction in attitude, goals, could be government, business, what have you, whatever you apply it to. Sea Change. It's also an excellent album by a musician named Beck that I really like, but that's neither here nor there. Appropriately enough, I've actually changed my attire for this video. I'm, for the first time on film, not wearing a flannel. But this term sea change, it means a fundamental change from one set of qualities and characteristics to another. The term is actually very old. It's derived from William Shakespeare's The Tempest, which was written in 1610. As I'm sitting here right now, the fog has actually rolled in around our house, and you can smell the ocean if you close your eyes. And I thought that was appropriate. So I'm going to read you just a couple lines from The Tempest. Full fathom 5 thy father lies. Of his bones are coral made. Those are pearls that were his eyes. Nothing of him that doth fade, but doth suffer sea change into something rich and strange. You know, it seems that everyone is always calling for change. Change gets talked about a lot. Politicians give speeches about it. Preachers give sermons about it. Bloggers opine about it. And artists and writers and musicians devote their craft to demanding it. Law enforcement groups commit to implementing it. Protesters carry signs declaring that it's time for it. Change seems to be on everyone's mind these days. Speaking of change, just a couple of weeks ago, I heard a story in the news that there were protesters in a town in a southern state protesting the murder of George Floyd, and they pulled down a Confederate statue that was in the town square of a small town. And I thought to myself for a moment, well, that's cool. That probably should happen. And then I had a second thought, which was, wait a second. There's Confederate statues in the United States of America, and I'm just now learning about that? I thought for sure that those had all been torn down a long time ago. Think about that for a moment. Treasonous traitors to our country that fought for the right to own other human beings as property. And someone, somewhere, erected statues to these men and then asked people of color to simply be okay with that. These are literal high places being torn down in the United States of America right now. If you need further evidence that something is dark and rotten in the hearts of people, then look no further than the public outcry against the tearing down of these statues. You know, if the Germans had erected statues to Goering and Himmler and Goebbels in the 1950s and then asked their Jewish countrymen what little there were left to just be okay with it, the cry of indignity would have been heard around the world, and rightfully so. Paul speaks of change when he writes to the church in the city of Corinth. He uses the imagery from when Moses came down from the mountain from the presence of God and had to veil his face in order to not totally freak people out, because his skin was glowing from being in the presence of God. He carried with him the law, which is the standard for human behavior, straight from the mind of God. And because the people were so hardened by their selfishness, they couldn't bear to look upon someone that had been in the presence of a supremely unselfish being. This is what Paul wrote. This is 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 16. He said, "But whenever anyone turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away." So Paul is writing not from the perspective of Moses, who'd been in the presence of the Lord, but from the perspective of the people. Whenever anyone turns to the Lord, there's opportunity here. You can turn from your selfishness. The veil is taken away, it's promised. He goes on to say, "Now the Lord is the Spirit, And where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Now think about that for a minute. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. The implication there is that the reverse is true as well. That where there is a lack of freedom, there is an absence of the Spirit of the Lord. So here's a question that I don't know the answer to. Do we get to claim to be a Christian nation if any one of our citizens enjoys more freedom than another? Maybe we should think about that a little bit. And we all, who with unveiled faces, Paul goes on to say, contemplate or think about or wrestle with, contend with the Lord's glory, that is his goodness, we are being transformed into his image with ever increasing glory, which comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. That word transformed, right in the middle of that text, is a Greek word, and it's pronounced metamorpho. This Greek word appears in the New Testament 4 times, 2 times written by Paul, once here, and then once in Romans chapter 12, verse 2, in a verse you're probably familiar with if you've read the New Testament, where Paul talks about being transformed by the renewing of your minds. That word transformed there is also metamorpho. And then Luke and Mark give dual accounts of a singular event that we refer now to as the transfiguration of Jesus. This is a little vignette in the Gospels where Jesus and 3 of his best friends climb up to a mountain top, and there the friends have a vision of Jesus being transformed or transfigured, metamorpho, into a glorious being. So from human into glory. And in this vision, they also see Moses and Elijah standing there. And Moses and Elijah represent the law and the prophets, or everything that God had communicated with people up until then. And the law and the prophets are made manifest and completed in this person of Jesus. And then he's glorified in front of them. So 2 things are happening there. One is that Jesus' glory is being revealed, but also we're given a standard, an impossible goal, you might say, to live up to. A promise that we can also be transformed. The way Paul said it is with ever-increasing glory, which comes from the Lord. If that word metamorpho sounds familiar to you, it's because we derive our English word metamorphosis from it. We use this word metamorphosis to describe what happens to a caterpillar when it's transformed into a butterfly. If you've never pondered this little miracle, I encourage you to do so. Here's what happens in a nutshell. A caterpillar, a many-legged, hairy creature that crawls around on the ground, spins himself a cocoon, and he climbs inside of it. And then he begins to liquefy himself from the inside out until nothing is left but a protein soup, the basic building blocks of life. And then a new creature is built from the ground up. And this new creature contains none of the same features. It's a brand new creation, you might say, that exits that cocoon. God left us this profound and inexplicable miracle to remind us that change begins on the inside. And it's driven by his Spirit, and the catalyst is the change in the way we think about important things. So can I ask you, as your friend, can I exhort you? May I implore you to be open to having your mind changed by better ideas. I don't mean my ideas. And I don't mean that these are new ideas, although some of them might be new to you or to me. These are ideas that are rooted in the values that God has already placed in the story of humanity. That all human beings were created in God's image. That freedom and justice and dignity are the birthright of every person. That compassion, patience, and kindness are virtues that are far more intrinsically valuable than nationalism, patriotism, or any man-derived ideology. That for all our failings, when we embrace these values as brothers and sisters in community, the stains of our pettiness and our selfishness and indifference to one another's plight will be burned away in the crucible that is love. If we truly want hope and change for our families, our community, and our world, it begins with the admission that maybe, just maybe, not every idea I have wrapped my arms around is a good one. Maybe it might be worth my time to listen to someone else for a little while. And maybe a sea change isn't so far out of reach after all. Thanks very much. I'll see you next time.